Greetings all, it's KB in beautiful Bluff Country, Minnesota. Today we are going to be working on the track bike. We're going to be working on a 2011 Kawasaki ZX-6R, and we're going to replace the spark plugs in it and go through the entire process so that there are minimal questions and or cluelessness for anyone who might be trying to take that on for the first time. We're going to go through it slowly, and hopefully that'll help everyone out. Fortunately for you guys, this is going to be the last time you see my mug because I'm going to be busy holding a camera. So we'll get this going, and I'll talk to you soon. Greetings everybody, this is KB, and I am going to be working on a 2011 ZX-6R Kawasaki. And we're going to do a plug change on this. The spark plugs are, of course, underneath the fuel tank and the air filtration system. And so what we're going to do is get the bike as stable as possible, preferably vertical. I like using a rear swing arm stand to keep it upright. And I also have it on the lift, although I am not going to be lifting it at all because I need access to the top side of the frame. And we'll go from there. I'm going to show you a couple of pieces of hardware that need to be removed, and seat removal, tank removal, and airbox removal to get to the engine. So I thought I would go over real quick the tools that I'm going to be using for this project. Surprisingly, there aren't that many, considering all the different components we're going to be working with and removing to get to the spark plugs on this machine. But real quickly, we're going to go with a 3/8 ratcheting socket, 6-inch knurled extension. It's actually a wobble extension, and a 10mm socket. And I've got a 3/8 drive torque wrench, clicker style torque wrench ratcheting. Then probably one of the more integral parts of it is the 5/8 spark plug socket, and then the feeler gauge for the spark plugs, 3, 4, and 5mm Allen wrenches or hex wrenches. I use T wrenches myself. I seem to like those better. I got a better feel for the torque that I'm putting on some of the smaller bolts. So I use T-handle Allen wrenches. That works pretty good. And then we've got the spark plugs, of course, that we're going to be replacing. And then I'm going to be using a hammer and a small screwdriver at the tail end of the process, and you'll understand what I'm doing there. And then I'm also using a magnetic tip number 2 Phillips, and I'm putting it in a driver, but I'm clutching it down. I got the clutch almost to the lowest setting possible, so that I don't break any components when I'm screwing the screws back in. And that's for the airbox. So I'm going to be using that to do that. But yeah, considering the process of getting to the engine itself, that's all we're going to need to use and for the entire project. So hopefully we'll get this done in a couple hours, and we'll go from there. First thing you'll notice that on the 2011s there is a single panel underneath the gas tank. It's a cosmetic panel, and that side panel is removed with one bolt on the front side, and then it's got a series of Velcro and hooks on it, and it's a pretty flexible piece of plastic, so you'd be able to get that removed quite easily. You can look in the general information part on your owner's manual to take a look at that, but I'll show you the bolt real quick. Hopefully you can see that. And it's the same on both sides, so we'll do that and then get going on removing the tank and the seat. Alright, we've got the side panels removed now, and that was with a 4mm Allen wrench on that first bolt, and then just tuck under the tabs and the hooks to get the whole piece off. There's the piece right there. And then what we're going to do is grab the 4mm Allen wrench again and remove the 2 bolts that hold the front of the seat in place, and we'll lift up the seat and pull it out, sliding it forward to remove the seat and set that aside. The one thing I would like to mention is when working on a motorcycle of any type for any reason or purpose, you want to make sure that the bike is as clean as possible to avoid any dirt infiltration into the engine or electrical systems or anything like that. It's going to prevent a lot of headaches later on. So get the bike clean before you work on it, and then you're going to have a much easier project to go through. Alright, we now have the seat removed, and now we're going to work on moving the fuel tank out of the way so that we can get to the airbox and eventually the engine. You notice that this has got the Olin steering damper on it, and the two bolts on either side of the bracket are also what hold the fuel tank in place. So what we're going to do is we're going to pop those 2 bolts out using a 5mm Allen wrench, and then scooch the steering damper aside, and then grab this last final bolt down here holding the rear end of the fuel tank in place, and we're going to just tilt the whole fuel tank back. I'm probably going to put some protective toweling on the rear cowl and stuff to prevent any scratches on the machine, and then we'll get access to the airbox. Okay, we got the fuel tank up and off to the side. As you can see, I have it just tilted back after removing that last bolt in the rear end of the fuel tank, which used a 10mm socket, and I set the fuel tank back, keeping an eye on all the fuel lines and vent hoses to make sure those didn't get pinched or damaged. And then to keep it into place, I just put a bungee cord around it to make sure that it doesn't skate around while I'm working on the engine. And now next to coming up is going to be the airbox, and we've got a series of number 2 Phillips head screws all the way around. I think there's a total of 9. There's also one right inside here in the center. I'm going to be using a magnetic tip bit to keep an eye on those screws as I'm pulling them out. And then eventually we're going to get up here to this 10mm bolt that's holding the cables in place, and that's going to release the airbox up on the top side as well. And then we'll get into the clamps for the carburetors, the injection system, the throttle bodies, I should say, to get the airbox off. Alright, we're getting ready to remove the cover of the airbox, and it was incorrect. There's not 9, there's 8 Phillips screws in there. And then we've got this sensor cable here. We're just going to unplug that real quick and get that away, and then we'll be able to lift the cover off and move it out of the way. I'm going to keep it connected to the hose in the back. I'm just going to drop it off to the side. Keep an eye on all these electrical connections here for the throttle bodies, and we'll go from there. Alright, so we've removed the airbox cover, and as you can see, this is the exposed air ports for the individual throttle bodies and carburetor system, the butterflies all there, and there's the air filter element. And with the ram air systems, they're going to have a lot of debris coming in, and of course you don't want to see anything in the air box at all. You don't want to see any dust, and that lets you know that the air filter element is actually doing its job. However, I do have debris in here. It's going to be anything from bugs and gnats to other items of interesting repute. And what I'm probably going to do is I'll probably vacuum that out with a shop vac real quick before putting it all back together again, just to be on the safe side. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to hit this 10mm bolt here with the socket, and then we're going to go with the throttle body clamps, which are right accessible by this plug here on the frame, using a 3mm Allen wrench. Alright, we've got the bottom of the airbox out of place, and as you can see there's all the throttle bodies, the butterflies there, and we now have access to the engine. And this is actually a coil plug style ignition system, which means that the coils are actually the caps or the plug boots for the spark plugs themselves. They all have individual connectors on them, and we're going to be working on getting those out. One thing I wanted to show real quick is the clamping system on the airbox. The clamping system for the throttle bodies is really kind of ingenious. It actually is just 2 bolts using that 3mm Allen wrench, and 1 bolt actually covers 2 of the throttle body seals, and so you can see we've got 2 bolts on opposite ends, and this is the exposed hole with the small plastic plug down there on the lift. The exposed hole actually gives you access to those 3mm bolts. You don't need to go too far, just get them loose, and if they're not quite loose enough, give it another hit a little bit, but you don't need to unscrew them completely. And then it's going to take a little bit of finesse in getting that lifted out. You want to lift it straight out and then back to get away from the intake area here for the ram air system. So this is the intake right here, and now we're going to start looking at the plugs. Alright, I disconnected one of the coil plugs from the ignition wires, and as you can see, this is the plug here. It's just a small Molex style plug, and pushing on the tab right here and then pulling back comes off pretty easy, much easier than some of the other coilover plug systems that I've seen. We're just going to continue doing that and then work on getting the plug coils out. Alright, so we've got the plugs all disconnected from the coils, and then I started pulling out this first one here, and basically to get these removed, you basically are just going to use some finesse. You're going to spin them, rotate them a little bit, and pulling at the same time. They'll eventually come out. Take your time with it, be nice to them, and prevent any damage to them for when they're reinstalled. The coils on these are not cheap, and so it's very important to make sure that you take care of them and the plugs. You'll notice that the ignition wire plugs are loomed, which means that in the wire loom that they have here, they have an order that they went out into the individual coils, so they pretty much stay in order once they're unplugged, and you'll be able to reorient them when you plug the coils back in to the ignition wires after the new spark plugs are replaced. Alright, all the coils are now removed, and as you can see, now we have visual of the spark plugs in there. You'll notice they do not have a cap on it. The spark plugs actually are just the threaded bodies, and so they don't have the cap insert that is sometimes used on other makes and models of motorcycles. And then the coils, although it doesn't really matter, I actually have the coils laid out exactly how I pulled them out. They are identical coils, but I just, for peace of mind, I kept them all in order so that I know exactly how they go back in. And now we're going to grab the spark plug socket and start removing the plugs. Alright, so here's the socket for the spark plugs, and then I'm going to be using a 6-inch wobble extension. You'll notice that on the tip of the extension, it's actually curved back, and allows you to go into a first click and actually wobble the socket a little bit to get it squeaked into the spark plug hole. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the plugs. I'm first going to break the plug free with the socket wrench, the 3/8 drive socket wrench, and then you notice that this extension is knurled, and so I'm going to actually spin this spark plugs out by hand to avoid any damage to the threads. So I'll break them free with the socket and then spin them out by hand. Alright, so here are the old spark plugs that are just removed from the engine, and as you can see, there is you can tell they've been used. And what we're going to be doing is putting the brand new ones in. We're going to gap them first. Usually the manufacturers are pretty good about gapping, but I usually like to check them. I usually use regular feeler gauges instead of a spark plug coin, but we'll get those properly set for the gap and then reinstall them. As you notice, I've got the wobble extension attached to the socket right now, and that is actually used for the very first cylinder over on the left hand side of the machine, which as you can see is really tight against underneath the frame. And so if you can get that squeaked in, what other people have done is used a couple 3-inch extensions. The other thing that I would want to remind people is when you're removing spark plugs, actually use a spark plug socket and not an actual deep well socket. Spark plug sockets, the good ones, actually have a rubber boot in there to not only protect the insulator, the ceramic insulator, but they also retain the plug. So when you're pulling the spark plug socket out of the engine, it actually keeps the spark plug retained in the socket, and you don't have to fish it out with needle nose pliers or anything like that. So use the right tools. Use an actual dedicated spark plug socket to remove and reinstall your spark plugs. Alright, so here's one of the new plugs next to the old plugs. Pretty obvious difference, of course. And I did check the gap on it, and it was dead on at 0.7 millimeters. And the tolerance is 0.7 to 0.8 millimeters, or 28 hundredths to 32 hundredths of an inch. With a metric bike, I tend to stay with the metric system, so 0.7 to 0.8 millimeters, and this feeler gauge was dead on with this plug, so I'm going to check the rest of the plugs. The plugs are right here, and they are the CR9E plugs, which is a standard that is in your owner's manual, NGKs, and I haven't gone to a different brand of plug or anything yet. Still working with these, so we're all set. I'm going to reinstall these by hand and then tighten them to torque with the socket wrench or torque wrench. Alright, so I just finished torquing down the spark plugs at 13 Newton meters, which is actually equivalent to about 10 foot-pounds. And I decided to use a ratcheting, clicking style torque wrench, 3/8 drive. They're available pretty reasonably, and this has been really good. The torque is accurate, and I use that real quick to torque them all down. They're not very large spark plugs, so they don't take as much torque as some of the other spark plugs that I've used. And we got that all set, and now we're going to put the coils back in and plug them in and continue on with the process. Alright, one of the tips that I had used for putting coils back in is basically using finesse. You can use a hammer and a regular screwdriver with a wide enough handle. You just set the handle of the screwdriver on top of the coil, and then gently tap with the hammer and get that coil to seat properly. That seemed to work pretty good, and we're going to keep going. Alright, I've got some of the plugs already plugged into the coils there, the Molex plugs, and I was going to show you real quick on these plugs here. They've got a little tab at the top that has a tooth on there to click into place, and when you push that back into place, you will hear it click just like that. And so now all four of those are attached and ready to go. And now we will work on putting the bottom of the air box back on, for not forgetting this hose here, which is going to connect to this nipple right here on the bottom edge of the box. And we will get that in place and then reclamp the throttle body clamps on either side of the bike. Alright, we got the bottom of the air box back into place, and got the clamp bolts clamped down inside there on the throttle bodies, the two bolts, and then this 10 millimeter bolt up here with the retaining arm for the throttle cables. And check and make sure that the cables are loose, there's no pinching or anything like that. And we will continue to put the top of the airbox on. Alright, we got the top of the airbox reattached and screwed into place with all the 8 screws, and including this one little tight one right underneath the hose here that I had to kind of finagle a little bit to get in there. But all the screws are tight. Also, make sure that this wire loom here gets set in between the retaining hooks on both locations, which is this cable right here. And then make sure this cable is plugged back in again. And there's the click for that, so we're all set. I think what we're ready to do is go ahead and get the tank put into place temporarily and give it a test start and make sure she's running acceptably. Alright, I just test started it and she popped off right away. Nice smooth idle. It's actually a choke idle, so it wasn't completely warmed up yet. I am going to now put this 10 millimeter bolt into the back side of the tank, and then the 2 bolts here with the steering damper that I had set aside. I'm going to reinstall those, and then put in the seat with the 2 4 millimeter bolts that are going in for that, and then I'm going to put the caps back on and the side panels. Take a look at the finished product in just a second. So after putting the bike back together and getting everything in order, making sure that there aren't any spare parts left over once you're done, making sure all your tools are back in their location so you didn't leave anything underneath the fuel tank or next to the battery when you were tearing it apart. I'm going to go ahead and give this thing a test run real quick, let it choke idle for a little bit, get her up to temperature, and then take it for a run and see how it feels and see if there's any noticeable difference. But I am going to make sure that my work area is clear and do a real quick full inspection of the bike again to make sure everything's in order before I take off. Also, at GAT, all the gear all the time. Wear your helmet, wear your jacket, wear your gloves, your boots. Make sure you're protected when you're taking your machines out on runs. It's going to be the best insurance policy that you have when riding. So be protected at GAT. All the gear, all the time. And I'm going to go take this puppy for a spin, and we'll be back in a little bit. And there it is. Got her done. All cleaned up, ready to go. New plugs feel great. They feel good. Much better performance than, of course, the original plugs that were in it. And we'll touch base later on. Thanks for watching.
not thinking the big I am. I'm not down on the ground looking for a cure. I'm not saying that I'm the man.